Hey, welcome everyone. We are back with a new episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. If you're turning in for the first time, I'd like to personally welcome you to a listener base of over 17,000 people. Yes, just like a few weeks back, we crossed 17,000 folks. When we did the last episode, we were at still 16,000. So it's going pretty fast. And right, so today we have Abhash Kumar. Abhash, I've known him for about 3 years now, Abhash, right? And he's been a part of like a lot of high growth companies like BYJU's, YourStory, and currently at Springworks. So Springworks, if you have not heard, it's one of the fastest growing HR tech companies in India, known not only for their tech and the product, but also for their innovative culture OS, which what we're going to talk about right in this episode with Abhash. So at Springworks, he plays the role of VP marketing, overlooking the branding, the demand gen, the employer branding activities, and the cultural initiatives that plays the magic at Springworks, right? Like everybody's talking about them on LinkedIn. So great. So without further ado, Abhash, welcome on the show. We have been talking about since what past 3 years now, but finally got some time around to do it, right?
Yes. Finally, we are here. Thank you so much, Sunil. And great to hear that the podcast has 17,000 listeners. I like to throw around this stat a lot. Around 4,000 or so podcasts are launched every week.
Yeah.
And by the time, so essentially, if you cross episode number 21, you are like in the top 1%
Up
of the
1%.
podcast.
Yeah. I think
And
we read
so
the same article.
this was another podcast where I heard this. I think Chris
Uh-huh.
Mills podcast. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
I digress. Yeah, great to be on the podcast. Like you said, I've known you for 3 years now. Fantastic stuff with the SaaS podcast. And great to be here. Let's talk about all things brand marketing, if I would, but from the
Yeah.
angle of employer branding, employee advocacy, because that's what we want to focus on.
Makes sense. And if people are wondering, how do I know Abhash? I think we met at the first ever GrowthX in-person session that happened in 2019, and that was like crazy. And Abhash was one of the like six people
Attendees.
who attended the session. That was like way long back, and now I think most of the people who listen to the show are also aware of GrowthX, and it's like a
GrowthX.
huge overlap. So, but yeah, would love to. So, Abhash, I know I gave a very short intro about you and Springworks, but would love you to, share more about how your journey has been into the SaaS ecosystem and, what folks are doing at Springworks.
Sure. So a quick recap of my career, if you will. Started a student startup back in college. This is Manipal back in 2011. It was a college student startup. I figured out, I was not meant to be running a startup. I wanted to be an employee. Very, very early, I figured that out. And that's when I joined BYJU's. This was back when BYJU's was, there was no app, there was Shah Rukh Khan, there was no $1 billion funding. This was just a cat institute. So I had a short stint there. Even there, the company grew quite a bit. And then I took a break of sorts for a year, went back to sort of the roots, like the startup ecosystem events and such. And that's how I ended up joining YourStory, where I've learned all my marketing, so to speak, right? On the job, 3.5, almost 4 years at YourStory is where I learned all my marketing jobs. Had a very short stint at Factor Daily. So till that point, it's mostly, media. First job at BYJU's was, of course, more of business development sales, right? And just a side note, that's what I keep telling people who ask me, how do I get into marketing? My answer is always start with sales, because that somehow I think, teaches you humility and, just talking to the customer, which is like, I believe is a bedrock of marketing, right? Just being able to talk to your customers. But yeah, that's how my SaaS journey started after I joined Springworks. We were, of course, doing a bunch of stuff in crypto blockchain side of things, but also, we have and will always be an HR tech company at the heart. As in, even the blockchain thing was, we were trying to solve for, think of it as LinkedIn for blockchain. And we can have a separate session on why, in hindsight, that is a very, very bad positioning, because you are sort of competing, you're putting yourself against LinkedIn right away, right? So that was one mistake in hindsight. But yeah, that's where my SaaS journey started. Yeah, I've been doing it for 4.5 years now. And yeah, that's been my time with Springworks. We've launched a bunch of products. There has been, B2B products as well as self-serve SaaS. One product also has a PLG motion. One is very, very sales-led. So yeah, all sorts of, variety of stuff to play with in terms of marketing.
Like not again, as I said, right? Like Springworks is not only known for the product and the tech that you folks have, but the amazing culture that the founders and the employees have built, right, in the company. So how do you go about defining the culture at Springworks?
Sure. So, of course, I was not there at day zero. Like the company started earlier than I joined. But of course, for all intents and purposes, you can say, that was the start of this journey. As in the founder, Karthik Mandaveli, there is only one founder, by the way. I mean, there is no other word to describe it. He's obsessed with, employee centricity, employee well-being, right? Like he wants to create this organization where not wants to, like that is what our organization is, right? Like every decision that we take is taken with the employee well-being at the center of it, right? Whether it's a decision on what sort of products we want to build, and I will get into that. All of our products have come from that philosophy itself, right? That's how we have built products. We built products to solve our own challenges, and when we realize, this is working very well for us, we start, of course, selling it to the world, if you will. But yeah, it's a very ingrained thing, in Karthik. And one of the stories that he keeps telling us is, he was at Carnegie Mellon. He did his master's at Carnegie Mellon in the US. And when he was interviewing for his first job, is when, the person who was interviewing him, the CEO of, I forget the name of the company, he said, Karthik, 1/3 of your life will be spent at the workplace. I mean, of course, the definition of at the workplace has, of course, changed in the past two years, but that was his thing. Like, you would want to work at a workplace where you would love to come to every day. And he sort of took that to heart, and he then decided to make this a workplace. Of course, he being the founder, wanted to create a workplace where every employee would, want to go to. And again, go to meaning, whether it is remote, hybrid, in office, whatever, and would feel good about it, right? So that's the main philosophy, is how can we incorporate employee well-being at the center of decision making? Now, what does that mean in practicality, right? Let's take one example here, one very, very recent example, right? So one of the things is we reduced our notice period. Typically, companies have a notice period of 1 month, right? Once an employee decides to quit the company, you have to stay back for a month, which is decent. Many companies have notice periods of 2 months, even 3 months, right? And they give all sorts of justification for why that is. We will not go into that. But we said, 2 weeks is more than enough time for anyone to be able to do that knowledge transfer. And given that we are a fully distributed remote company that believes in async work, right? So very few calls, most of the things are documented, and we will get into more of that later. So we decided, like, if everything is documented, if everything is already there on Slack channels, what is this requirement of 1 month of knowledge transfer, right? So can we reduce the notice period to 2 weeks? And that comes from the thought process that if an employee has already decided to leave the company, why should we put any roadblocks in their way, right? Like, I'm not saying companies that have 1 month notice period have sort of, put a roadblock. There might be genuine reasons for that. But for us, for our specific use case, if we can remove that roadblock, why not? Another example for that is we removed all sorts of non-compete, things that you have in your employment agreement, right? You can't work for, say, you can't start the company in same domain. You can't work for, I mean, most of it is legalese. How many companies do even follow that? But we have removed that altogether. So there, Karthik's thinking process is, going forward, we will all have we will not work for one single company, right? Like, going forward, we will have, multiple jobs. Maybe we will be, consultants working for multiple companies. So can we start thinking from that? Like, one of the things that I realize is his thought process is, there are X number of things that can disrupt the way we work. And those are going to happen in, say, 1, 2, or 5 years. But can we start, disrupting ourselves even before that thing becomes mainstream? And so all of that comes from that thought process.
Got it. No, that's a very interesting take also, right? There's this book on culture, right? I was talking about like having a different perspective, like removing all these so-called terms that are there in the employment agreement. Again, as you said, not sure like how many companies follow those actually. Like the
Yeah.
non-compete one is it's a very bad one in India,
Yeah.
specifically where, and the other one is the notice period, because companies exploit the notice period like anything. It should be dependent on role to role as well, right? Like if the
Yeah.
role
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
too deep and sometimes it might take 60 days, yes, right?
Correct.
Agreed, justifiable, right? But for some roles, I mean, you can just go off in 2 weeks, man. Like it should,
Well, for
it shouldn't.
majority of the roles, Sunil, I would say there are
Yeah,
maybe 10 to 20 roles in each company that, are that deep that they
yeah,
need maybe 60 to 90
yeah,
days.
and probably for the non-compete as well. I mean, it should also be role to role. Like for somebody who's like a marketer
Yeah.
or who's a product manager or who's anyone, for them non-compete for like shouldn't matter much, right? Like
Yeah.
same as the notice period part. But yeah,
Correct.
coming to that point, like defining culture, as we talked about it earlier, it's very important for it to come from top down. And
Top
when I
down.
say top down, it's not always the executives, it's also your manager, right? If you're a marketing person, your manager. If you are a product person, like head of product, right? Or any department basically. So like how do you inculcate these kind of values not only into the employees but also to the people who are managing other people, right? So I remember about Ben Horowitz. I've read two books by him, like The Hard Things About Hard Things and the
Yes.
recent one he launched in 2019, like What You Do Is Who You Are, right? And in that
Yeah.
book he tells a beautiful story. I don't know if you've read that book, but for most people, like I'll just explain the story in very short. So what Ben tells is like, the analogy of a gang member running his gang is like a CEO or a founder running his company. If a gang member makes a mistake, and do you punish the member or do you not punish the member, right? If you don't punish, then it sets up expectations in all the other gang members that, hey, you can do mistakes and those would
Yeah.
be let go. And if you punish the member, then it might, create a sense of fear in the people
Fear.
that, hey, you're not allowed to do mistakes, right? But if you take that analogy and apply it to a company, right, like obviously like mistakes are welcomed and you learn from them, but then how do you make sure that there is some sort of control? Like you want people to have the freedom in the company and do whatever they want, but also still have control in, like, not from a controlling standpoint where you are micromanaging their activities,
Yeah.
but still, like, there are some guidelines that you need to follow, right?
Correct.
And it does affect, like, small activities in your day-to-day work. That's why it's been said, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no
Correct.
matter how much ever strategy you do, the culture is not right, it's nothing's gonna work, right? So what
Correct.
are these
Correct.
small playbooks, or what are the things that has worked for Springworks particularly?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, there is carrot, there is stick, all of that, right? But the one thing that works very, very well for us and is one of our culture tenets. By the way, we have defined 10 culture tenets. And one of them is err on the side of over communication. And it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of amazing that this culture tenet was created even before we went remote. Now, with us being remote, this has become the most important culture tenet, right? Which is one thing that I say is called, this philosophy is called cry, which is essentially constantly repeat yourself. So in coding, there is this philosophy of dry, don't repeat yourself, right? But for culture, what works is cry, constantly repeat yourself. So nothing is going to be, you can write, several documents, but of course, documentation is very important. If you leave things to, how people perceive it, people will make 10 people for the same statement will make 10 meanings out of it, right? So you need to be very, very explicit. And that only happens by constantly repeating yourself. And that's what we do very, very well, right? So we don't rely on, say, we wrote a document. Of course, we have a written guideline, we have a written documentation and everything, but we don't just rely on that. We keep repeating it over and over again. So one of the very, very small things, it might seem even trivial, is that, we have set up our Slack in such a way that anytime we type out a culture tenet as is, so say, if I were to type out err on the side of over communication, exact same thing, the Slack bot immediately pops up what this culture tenet means, right? One is
Nice.
the
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 words itself. But what do we mean when we say err on the side of over communication? Right. So anytime someone types that, the definition of it, not the definition, as in the explanation of the, it gets mentioned by Slack itself. The other thing that we did, and this is where we go back to, how the culture is sort of defining how we build products as well, is we have a product called Engage With, right? Which is essentially rewards and recognition tool, which works within Slack and MS Team. So, you have to give a kudos or a shout out to a colleague or anyone from cross team as well, maybe to your manager even, for something that they helped you with, or, a job well done, whatever, right? Okay, kudos, you wrote a very good copy for this website page, right? That sort of stuff. So for every time you give a kudos or a shout out, you have to also assign a culture tenet to it. Which of the 10 culture tenets did this particular activity or action, this person you are recognizing for, is a good example of, right? So if someone, followed up a bunch of times to get something, to see something get published, right? So many a times what happens is you might say, okay, my job is done here. I have written the copy. I've sent it to the designers. Now it's the job of someone else to, take it live. But even if it was not your job, you saw to it that, you ensured you followed up with the designers, you ensured you followed up with the front-end developer to see that the page is published. Then the culture tenet that you followed is execution is the metric. Right? That is the only, that is one of the culture tenets that we have. So when I'm giving a kudos to someone, along with saying, good job following up, seeing this to fruition, a good job getting our landing page live, along with that, the tool itself prompts, which value did this, which culture tenet this person recognize, right? So it's sort of a feedback loop. Now, because this is posted in a public channel and other people within the team are seeing that, oh, this person did this, and this is how they sort of took the value forward, took the culture forward by doing it, right? So there is a subconscious association. Of course, no one is making notes that, oh, if I have to do this well, this is the value, this is the culture tenet. But subconsciously, you are building that feedback loop within the organization, and you're sort of reinforcing the culture.
Right? Sort of recognition as well.
Exactly. So there is recognition, and the recognition is backed up by a culture tenet. And that's why, whenever we, some other organization that sort of onboards on Engage With, we also, in many cases, we have told them, okay, you don't have culture tenets. Maybe, your HR team or the founding team or the management team should create a culture tenet. So we are not just trying to, even with our products, when we are doing a sales-led motion, right? So we are not just trying to sell them the product. We are also trying to, pass on some of the learnings that we have had from our culture, some of the things that have helped us build this, good culture that many people on, LinkedIn, of course, we talk about it on LinkedIn enough, and many other people, reach out to Karthik or me or someone else in the team, how can I build the same for us? So we have a very sort of, we get into the dirt, so to speak, right? So we tell them, not just this tool, but here are 10 other things that, we do that you could try. We are not mandating it, but here are the other things that you can try if you're genuinely interested in building a good culture.
Makes sense. And that brings me to my next point, right? About like building a great environment by acting and not talking. Like you are inculcating those things yourself, and you're acting it out, and it's just not like, words written on the wall, in the good frames that, hey, these are our culture tenets, and, we have to follow this or whatever. But that's really great to know. But I'm very sure, like, this is like one-off companies. I mean, there might be other companies who might be doing like 20, 30, 50, 60% of it, but I'm very sure not 100%, based on how much, like all the companies that I've spoken to and all the people that I've spoken to at these companies. What I really like is that the same part that I just spoke, right? Like acting and like, actions and not only words, right? So when you hire people at Springworks, right? So you check if they have the matching skills for the job, they can do it or not. Even if they don't have 100% skill, but they do have the right mindset to do it, great, like works. So you might have all the technical and functional and personal skills are check, right? But do you also have like a culture check, right? Since like you have a lot of culture tenets that are built in your org, that makes me think, do you have like, culture fit tests that you do with each new employee that is joining the company? Because I think most of the people at Springworks who have joined might not have been in the same or close
Correct.
to same environment in their previous org, right? It's very different.
Correct.
And now when they come here, it might be like a cultural shock to them, a good cultural shock that, okay, this is how this also happens, but it's still a shock, right? So how do you break that barrier? Sometimes when, you tell good things to people, they find it hard to believe that, because it's too good to be true.
Too good to be
So,
true. Yeah.
yeah.
That
So
happens a lot with us, by the way. Yeah.
so how do you break
No,
that
so
barrier with hiring when it comes to hiring these people?
Sure. So to be very, very specific to your question, we don't have a culture test, right? So there is no specific culture test as such. And by the way, we don't expect any single person to, there is no way to test out, by the way, that, they follow all these 10 culture tenets. But I will take a step back and tell you what that means for us, right? So we are, Sunil, a bootstrapped company, right? So unlike some of our funded counterpart, I would like to caveat here that we do pay well. I think we are,
Obviously.
30% above market, but we are nowhere close to like a Series B, Series D funded company, right? In terms of paying. So that's why we have focused so much on employer brand. Right. An employer brand as an output of what we actually do. Like you said, we actually do these things. We don't just say these things. Now, I will take this back to the paradigm of, I will give you the analogy of brand marketing here as well, right? We all know as SaaS practitioners, I'm assuming, most of the people who listen to this would be SaaS practitioners. You also know this, product differentiation is dead, right? Every product looks, feels, does the same thing. Most of the products will have 95% of the same features. All the website homepages, if you were to redact the name of the company, no one will be able to tell which is what, right? Unless you are from the SaaS ecosystem, everyone knows what the company is. But if you were to ask a lay person, remove the name, they would not know the difference. So that's where brand comes into the picture, right? That is the whole philosophy, thesis of brand marketing, that you have a unique point of view, right? So what is your unique point of view? That is the same analogy that we have applied to employer branding.
Makes sense.
So now we are saying we cannot afford to be that company that just throws money at you because we have no unique point of view. We can't, I'm not saying all of the companies that are throwing money at you have bad culture, but I'm saying that is not of the paramount importance to them, right? So because they are, VC funded, the main goal for them is, how can I get to the next round of funding?
Revenue.
Which means, how can I grow the users, whatever, right? Revenue, I don't know. For many of the companies, revenue doesn't even come into the picture. But let's say, user growth is one of the main metrics, right? Now, we know that we cannot differentiate ourselves with the pay. Again, I'm caveating here. We do pay well above market standards, but not as much as funded companies. So then we come back and say, how can we create a unique niche for us, right? In the market. And the market for us would be talent market, right? So that we do by having a unique POV. What is our unique POV? We are employee centric. Employee well-being is the number one thing that we do. And every policy that we build in the company will have that as the central decision point, right? So employee well-being will be of the paramount importance. So that shows up in our, fully distributed. We are not only fully distributed, we pay to, employees. So we pay like 25,000 rupees per annum for people to, take a vacation in any part of the country as they please. We, of course, do, all sorts of, you want table, chair, desktop, laptop, whatever, right? All sorts of reimbursement. All of that we do, but also we try to be as async as possible, right? So we are not just remote for the sake of it. Like as a manager, I have a grand total of 5 calls per week. That's it. And I see in my team, the most number of calls that an IC does in our team, in the marketing team, is 3. Most of the people have 1 call per week. That's it. So those are the things that we focus a lot on. And that's what we actually do that within that company. And that's what we talk about on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Now, so what that does, Sunil, is it attracts is that it attracts the sort of people that want that sort of a lifestyle for themselves, right? So people who believe in sort of work-life balance, right? Now, it's perfectly fine. I'm not demeaning anyone. It's perfectly fine for someone to prioritize salary, right? But there would be a niche within that audience that is prioritizing work-life balance, that, wants to be able to work from their home. There might be extenuating circumstances that doesn't allow them to move out of their tier 3 city or, town or village, wherever they are. They want some kind of flexibility, right? So they might have, I don't know, ailing parents, maybe they have to make multiple hospital visits. So they will not be able to work in an in-office setting, but here they have the flexibility to say work in the later hours of the day, and in the 9 to 5, they can be doing something else, which is of much more importance in their personal life. So that's how we have created a niche market for ourselves, right? Niche market within the talent market. Now, given that, of course, that the number of those people might be very small, but those people have a very, very, very strong, want to work with us. You would be surprised that, at any point, I think the most number of job openings that we have had was like 2 months back, which was like 12 job openings. At this point, I think we have 2 or 3 job openings. Still, we get 200 inbound applications every single day.
Oh, wow.
And that is insane for a company that is not talked about in the media. Right. So that's another thing. I don't rely on media at all. We just rely on our own, employee advocates, the founder brand in, Dave Gerhardt's jargon. So Karthik's LinkedIn, Twitter, my LinkedIn, Twitter, and all of this. Right. So so that is what having a unique POV has done, approach to how we attract talent and all of that. And when that is the case, most of the people we are attracting are of the kind who, are oriented towards our culture. So that's why in most cases, a culture test is not even required. That's why I took a step back to explain to you this thing. And of course, while talking also, you figure out, right? Like there are enough questions that you can ask to get a feel of. I'm not saying, we have 100%, foolproof way of figuring it out. There is, of course, inherent bias in every single person, but we get a good feel of, whether this person will be a good fit or not.
Makes sense, yeah. And I don't know about everybody else who's listening now, but I'm thinking about the 200 applications that you get per day and how do I get access to that if you're not hiring. I'm very sure like people are going to reach out to you and say that, hey, Abhash, if you're not hiring those people, can you get access to that?
You know what? Maybe not relevant to the conversation. So we have built this applicant tracking system, which is forever free. It's called Spring Recruit. It is meant for, 50% startups, 30% startups who maybe cannot afford a lever or a greenhouse or whatever, right? So that is the whole intent of it. We want to forever free. This was one of the ideas that we had, that can we open the rejected talent pool of applicants within that ecosystem, right? So if company X has rejected, this candidate after 3 rounds of interview, can we open it up to company Y saying, company X, which is very similar to what you are doing and has a similar role open, has rejected this candidate after 2 rounds. So maybe you want to, get on a call with this particular candidate. But yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But yeah, man, like totally, right? As you said, most of the people for like, anybody, right, who's changing the job, they will look for 2 things, right? One is salary and obviously second is culture, right? Like how good is that? But which is the one out of the 2 is on the higher priority for that person is a question, right? For, as you said, like if you pick 100 people, for 90 of them, 85 or 90 of them, salary they would put as the primary like priority, and culture will always be second, right? But there are still like 5-10 people out of those like 100 would be of, hey, no, like even if I get paid like 5-10 lakhs less from the market, that's okay, but I'm getting good culture, like my good work-life balance, which is equal to worth every penny that I'm not losing, but just adjusting it somewhere else, right? Like I don't think I'm losing the money, I'm not letting go of anything, but I'm just getting something else added to like my life rather than just monetary benefits, right? So like, do you feel the the amount of people which are there on the second side of things, right, which value the culture on the higher side than salary, after COVID, has it changed? Like, has it increased? Has it remained the same? That is one. And secondly, what activities do you do for people? Like, I'm very sure that out of those 80, 85 who are still on the salary, who are still putting salary on the primary, like, priority, there would be still a good amount of people who would, just switch to the second part if they're convinced, right? So what activities do you do to, like, make the switch for these people, right? And I'm sure, like, LinkedIn posts, founder brand, all
Correct.
the, like, cultural decisions that you have made, the culture in general that you have built surely attracts, right? But then, have you seen any tipping point for these people, for these 80, 85 people who are putting salary on their thing, but they need like a certain push to come on the other side?
Correct. Correct. So yeah, good question. The answer to that is we don't want to go there. Right. So we just want to play in this niche, which again, this won't be a good analogy for a SaaS company because, for a SaaS company, once you have, captured a particular niche, you want to increase your concentric circle and, go up market and all of that. Right. But for us, given for a SaaS company, they're looking to increase their revenue, right? Go from 1 million to 5 to 10 to 50, whatever. Right. But for us, we will possibly, go from 200 employees to 400 employees in the next 2 years. Right. So we don't need to blitz scale our way in terms of number of employees. So that is something that we don't want to do. We don't want to go and play there. Having said that, there are ecosystem or environmental factors, if you will, that help us. Right. So what is happening now is, without naming anyone, there are at least 3 employees who have left us for other so-called remote companies, and they were promised in their job interview that your role will be permanently remote, we will never call you back to office. They are now being called back to office, right? And so these people are like, of course, I'm not demonizing them or anything. It's perfectly fine to opt for that higher salary, right? But now they have been sort of manipulated. Right? They were told that, okay, we will give you this higher salary and your role will be permanently remote. But now they are being called back to office, right? And so this is a very specific example. But generally also, as more and more people are being called back to offices, and especially this is true for 27, 28 years plus people, right? I think younger people still want to move to bigger cities because they want to see the glam and glitz of glam and glitz of big city. And let's be honest, there are basic stuff as well at play here, right? Like if you think about, their dating life, for example, right? It's something we don't think about a lot, right? Like they're maybe, staying with their parents. How much of a chance in maybe a small town, how much of a chance do they have with something like that, right? So they also want to hang out, watch, movies in multiplexes, hang out with people of the opposite gender or whatever, I don't want to get into that. So for those reasons, younger people do want to move to cities. But then there is this, 28, 30 plus, if I may, who are sort of settled in life, if you will, and they want to be able to do their things remotely or at least have the option of working from anywhere. So now that they are being called back to office, this is also one of the reasons why the number of inbound applications to Springworks has increased. Right? Because the companies that were claiming that they are going to be remote are all suddenly, saying that, oh, remote is not working for us. People are not productive, because I don't know how things are suddenly changing, because for 2 years people were productive and now suddenly, people are not productive. So come back to office. But whatever, we'll not get into that. Now, these people are realizing that they got manipulated and they have gotten used to, being productive, working from anywhere or from home or wherever, right? So that is also helping our cause. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. I think when you mentioned about people going to cities for the dating part, when I moved to Bangalore, I never personally thought about this. My only thing was, I'll get to meet people and I'll do meetups.
No, because that was the default. That was the default, right, Sunil? But here, they had no option for the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So now the thought process is very different. At that time, of course, the thing...
post-COVID,
Yeah,
things change.
pre-pandemic, it was you have to move to a Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Mumbai if you have to get a good job. Now you have the option of being remote, right? So in that scenario, now you're thinking about the other things.
The other thing, I would still say, man, if I want to move to Bangalore, I'll do it for the meetups and the people. But anyway.
Of course, that was just one example.
I'm just kidding. But anyway, I think we have a lot. I mean, I can go on, and I'm very sure that you can go on and on talking about this as well. It's a very, culture is always a very close topic to my heart as well. Like me, I like to read a lot about it and company culture. I like to know how things are happening in, in India, in different SaaS companies particularly. Hence, I keep talking to people about the, different companies' culture. Right. So for this episode, I think we've reached the course for now, and let's move on to the lightning round. Nothing, where I'm going to put you on the spot for about 3 questions, and you have to answer quickly because it's lightning round, as it says. So yeah, you ready for it?
Sure. Yes, I am.
Great. So yeah, first one, like, what's the one thing that has helped you shorten your learning curve?
Just doing the thing. So I keep giving this example. I know this is a lightning round, but just a quick example. When I was learning how to drive, I was driving in city traffic and I was still, scared and all of that. So one day on a whim, I decided we will do a road trip to Manipal. And I convinced some of my Manipal friends, by the way, this is a small university town in Karnataka, done my engineering from. So I just convinced them and said, we will do this road trip. And of course, I told them, I know how to drive, but that sort of shortened the learning curve for me. So that was essentially 500 into 2000 kilometers of ride over just 3 days. And, once I did that, all the hesitations, all the, you do ghat roads and, a bunch of stuff. I mean, you get all sorts of things when you do a 500 kilometer up and down, right? So yeah, that's the only way to shorten that is, just do the thing.
Yeah, learning by doing. That's what we used to preach at WhatFix. Anyway, so yeah, second one, like, what do you know about your work now that you wish you would have known when you first started?
So the thing was, you always wanted to be the manager. That is always the goal, right? Like, this manager is telling me things to do. 2 years from now, I will be the manager and I will, we have 5 people, 10 people under me. That this is the worst job possible, being a manager. It's a very tough job. It requires a very different skill set. That is something, the people don't think about at 25, 26, because you have to let go of the ego of execution. Right? Like execution is the last thing on your to-do list. The first priority is, unblocking your people, enabling them to do their work properly, helping them reach their goals. Right? So that is, one of the things that I learned.
Nice. I've always been an IC, by the way, and I never want to become a manager, not for the ego part, but I love execution. That's why.
I totally get you. It's not for everyone.
Yeah. And that is something I figured out way early, that what I don't want to do more than what I want to do. And okay, these are 10 things I never want to do, and I won't go in that line at all.
This is one of the topics that is also very close to my heart. Like in every single podcast that I do, and most of my guests are people from the HR world, right? I ask them this question again and again, because what happens is, you are a very good individual contributor, and then suddenly you're asked, okay, we are growing now, hire 3 people, and by default you are the manager, right? But manager is a very different line of work altogether. It needs a very different skill set, and at least in startups, no one gets trained for those skill sets, and that's how we end up with bad managers, right? Of course, you can learn on the job, but while you are learning, the 3 people under you are bearing the brunt of you being a bad manager. So again, a topic that is close to my heart.
Yeah, it's a lot of ripple effect around the corner. So yeah, the last one in lightning round, like, who is someone that inspires you and why?
So my inspiration are people. So the first name that comes to mind is Daniel Vassallo. And this is a guy on Twitter, small bets is the thing that comes to mind. So lifestyle, management, lifestyle business is the sort of thing that interests me a lot. So I have never thought of, building this $100 million or unicorn companies, but I've always had, can I do a bunch of stuff? That's what Daniel calls, having a portfolio of small bets. So you have a micro SaaS, you have maybe a part-time job, Maybe you do something else on the side, and are you able to do your hobbies also on the side? So that sort of stuff I'm attracted to, and that's why Daniel Vassallo, people like David Perel, because writing is something that again, I want to be a writer. So yeah, those are the sort of people who inspire me a lot. Daniel Vassallo, David Perel. Yeah, those are the first names that come to mind immediately.
That's
Ryan
really
Holiday,
great to
by the
know.
way. Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy. That is my favorite
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
And Ryan Holiday, one of my favorite people on the internet as well.
That's really amazing. It's great to see like so many people inspiring you and like from different backgrounds for different reasons, right? And a lot to learn from each one of them for sure.
Correct.
Amazing. So yeah, thanks a lot, Abhash, for doing this. I mean, it was really interesting. Again, as I said, we can go on and on talking about culture, and I think this is
I
like
know.
one topic like we both love.
Yeah.
And thanks a lot for your time
Maybe
and
we should
finally doing
maybe we
this.
should take another 3 years to do the next a follow up to this.
Yeah, no, that's something bad on my end. I'm gonna like if the
No,
next
no.
episode happens, it's gonna happen like in the next year for sure.
Sure. Okay, thanks a lot, Sunil. It was great talking to you. Always fun chatting, having just a chat, right? Rather than
Yeah.
have, a bunch of questions that you're answering. And yeah, these are just topics, like you said, there are topics close to your heart. These are all the topics which are very, very close to my heart. So I tend to
Nice.
ramble on a lot. I think, listeners may give that feedback, but that's perfectly fine.